Hey, it's Coach Alex here. We're going to do a Coach's Corner today, which is basically a question and answer for us sent in by one of our viewers. Now, we've got a question here from Jay Krull, who writes, I'm thinking of investing in a disc wheel road bike, but I'm not sure of the aero or weight penalty. I've heard they're worse aerodynamically. Is this true? I also ride TT and might be using my disc brake wheels in TT if they fit. Would they be faster or slower on my TT bike? Would they be slower on my TT bike? So basically Jay is asking, what is the penalty for riding disc wheels? So this is an excellent question, and for sure it's quite confusing. You've probably come across a few sites looking at this, or maybe a few videos. GCN did one recently, a field test. We want to unpick this here. We want to really know what's the difference between the disc and the non-disc brake bike, both in terms of weight and particularly in terms of aero. So let's start with weight, guys. Now, one way to add up the weight of a disc brake bike system is to add up all the individual components. Once we factor everything in, and I've not mentioned the wheels, i.e. the rims themselves. Actually, the rims can be lighter because you don't have to have that brake track reinforcement. So they may be 50 to 70 grams less. So once you add all that up, that's 500 to 800 grams right there, assuming you bolted everything on. But I don't think that's an exactly fair comparison. And as always, it doesn't necessarily mirror what you find in the real world. So I had a look at the FastFitnessTips database, and I pulled out some of the head-to-head comparisons where a manufacturer had got a certain non-disc version, and then they brought out the disc version, the same year or in the very next year, so that the other specs didn't really change. So here are some examples for you from our database. We've got Specialized Roubaix S-Works SL4. You got the pre-disc and then the disc version. You got the Specialized S-Works Tarmac Dura-Race, the Venge VIS, the Tarmac Comp C2, the Stevens Ven 2, the Stork Scenario, the Trek Demane 6 and SL7. You got the BMC Gran Fondo, Canyon and Cannondale, and also Cube Lightning C62. And what we've done is we've extracted all the published weights for the non-disc version, and they add up to exactly 7.59 kilos on average, that is, across those, 13 bikes. And then we've done the same with the disc brake version, and that adds up to 8.22 kilos. So that's roughly 0.6 kilos, or if you want to be more exact, 630 grams. So although it's not a definitive test, it is representative of the real world. If you allow the manufacturer to swap out the non-disc for the disc version, make all the changes that they need to do, but otherwise keep the specs of the bike broadly the same, in terms of the general group set, then the penalty is around about 600 grams, which is really not that bad, I would say. Okay, so that's weight, guys, but let's come on to aero now. Now, as it happens, Specialized Wind Tunnel did test disc versus non-disc brake road bikes with broadly similar specification, and that's in this video here. Let's have a quick look.
But the cool thing about this test is both frames are identical, with the major change being the brakes themselves, the hoods, and the rims. So like all of our other testing, we'll take a baseline of the rim brake bike, then switch to the disc brake bike.
So in this case, the brakes, the hoods, and the wheels were different. And at 0 degrees or a head-on wind, there was actually no difference between the two setups. Now, when we introduced that 10-degree yaw angle to simulate a crosswind to expose those disc brakes, we started to see a little bit of a difference. So over our standard 40-kilometer distance, we saw that the disc brakes were about 8 seconds slower than the rim brakes.
So you can actually see the results here, that at 0 yaw, there's actually no difference. But at 5 to 10 degrees yaw, they reported that there's an 8-second difference across a 40 kTT. Now, if you're wondering what an 8-second difference is equivalent to, I'll refer you to their other test on Pin It to Win It, where they looked at pinning or leaving loose a race number on the jersey. That was almost exactly the same difference. So having a flappy race number versus a tight race number is around about that 8 second difference. And also compare it to their test on tidying up long hair, it was certainly less than that. So Pin It to Win It and disc versus rim brake bikes, you're talking about roughly 1 to 2 watts. That was 2014, but there's since been a test in Velo News of disc versus non-disc road bikes, and that's here. And this is a nice test done by Carl Fretz and Logan Van Bokel. So basically they tested with this protocol that was pretty good, mostly identical spec frames, one built for disc, one non-disc, and that was the Specialized S-Work Tarmac. They used two sets of wheels built in the same specification other than the need to obviously have discless non-disc brakes. And then they had similar drivetrain and everything pretty much the same. So this was a fairly good test with what you would need to compare a road disc brake versus road non-disc brake in the wind tunnel. And what were their results? Well, their results from the wind tunnel was that at 0 yaws, or very close to 0, you were not really losing much. It was about 1 watt of a difference. And the most, as the yaw went up, the losses became worse for the disc brake bike exponentially, but still modest. The maximum was 20 degree yaw, losing 8 watts. Now, before we panic about 20 degrees yaw and 8 watts, a rider in typical road conditions is only going to come across 20 degrees yaw 1% of the time. We've shown you our yaw calculator before, but I'll just show it you again. If you want to look at the yaw percentages, they're here in this graph. Essentially, 70% of the rider's time is spent 0 to 7.99 degrees yaw. So plus to minus 8, if you like, 70% of the time. And if you go plus to minus 10 degrees, that's 80% of your time. So only 1% of your time, and possibly less, the faster you are, the less it is spent at 20 degrees yaw at 8 watts. Now what that means is to actually really hone down on the overall figure of disc brake losses, we have to do a loss by yaw calculation. Now we did a more complicated 4x4 version of this when we looked at rider position and yaw for our helmet video. But on this occasion, let's have a look at disc on versus no disc losses. So all this is doing is breaking yaws down into these categories 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19 and 20 plus, and saying how much time out of, let's say, 10,000 seconds would you typically ride in each of these zones, yaw zones. And then you're able to extract the yaw differences, which are amplified exponentially as we go up through the yaws. They start off at 0 or 0.5 generously, let's say, and then 1 watt at 5 to 9 degrees, then 2 watts, then 4 watts, then 8 watts. Okay, so then if you multiply the difference by the time in that zone, the time in that yaw, as it were, and average it all out, it turns out that the average losses across all yaws that a typical road cyclist is going to face is around about 1 to 1.5 watts for using a disc brake versus non-disc brake bike. 1 to 1.5 watts. And it's likely to be less for a TT bike. Now there are some caveats here. The caveats are, it depends of course on the total design of the bike. For example, what do I mean by that? Well, here's a brilliant example from Eurobike 2017, the Scott Foil 2018 disc. And the reason I'm pointing out the Scott Foil 2018 disc is that the fork design includes a semi-hidden design to slightly cover the calipers and the rotors. Now you can get fully enclosed rotors these days, but this is an innovative design from Scott, which actually would probably minimize the difference. Also, obviously, it depends what kind of braking system your non-disc brake bike has. Because if your non-disc brake bike has concealed brakes, then it's going to have an aero advantage with the concealed brakes versus, unconcealed brakes. So, for example, the front brake is going to cost around about 1 watt in losses compared to having no brake at all. Indeed, somebody's actually tested this, believe it or not, the difference between disc brakes, non-disc brakes and no brake at all. And this was Nathan Barry, engineer at Cannondale. And Nathan Barry did a nice TT bike test now with disc brakes versus conventional rim brakes and brakes removed. So at 0 yaw, no brakes at all were an advantage. Either braking system was a slight disadvantage, but there wasn't really a lot to choose between them, as you see here. This is in CDA. But actually there was a slight penalty for rim brakes at a positive yaw angle and a slight penalty for disc brakes at a negative yaw angle. I'll just explain what this means from this picture. Essentially, if the wind is coming from this side, then it's a slight disadvantage for disc brake wheels. Whereas if the wind is coming from this side, the non-drive side, it's either a slight advantage or no particular difference for disc brake wheels. So there is a difference compared to, let's say, left versus right or drive side versus non-drive side wind angles. Now, on the topic of TT bikes, it might just be worth saying that TT bikes with disc brakes versus without disc brakes have been tested. Now, this is a slightly different test to the one I was talking about before, where you hold as much as you can the same and see if there's a difference. In these tests, the most common protocol is just to test the complete bike. And a couple of bikes are very notable for their inclusion of disc brake wheels, and they're the Cervelo P5X and the Diamondback Andean. So there's a nice test of these by Kylie Austin Young and also Heath Dotson and Brian Stover, who basically crowdsourced the money to do a wind tunnel test of several bikes, which included Premier Tactical, Felt B2, Cervelo P5X, Cervelo P5 Normal or S6, and also Diamondback and Ventium 1. And it turns out Cervelo P5X and also Diamondback Andean were by no means the outliers. In fact, they often perform best. So in their results, they found that the disc brake TT bikes often perform best. Now, I'm not saying that was down to the disc brake itself. It could have been down to the entire design. Of course, it's related to the entire design. But that's one of the key messages here. It's not just the disc itself. It's how everything integrates together. Even the effect of the rider on the bike. So whether the test is done with or without the rider makes a difference. Okay, so to summarize, disc brake road bikes basically give up around 600 grams or so compared to like-for-like equivalent, but they don't really lose anything direct at 0 yaw, and across all typical yaws, they give up about 1 to 2 watts. And 1 to 2 watts, if I refer you, put this in context, if I refer you to our 32 most marginal gains countdown, 1 to 2 watts is the equivalent CDA change of changing your crank length. I'm not talking about mechanics there. I'm saying if you change your crank length, there is an effect on CDA. It's a very small effect on aerodynamics, but it's roughly 1 watt typically. Obviously, it depends on the length of the change, but I'm talking about a 1 to 2 position change in crank length, i.e. 2.5 to 5 millimeters, which is a very small disadvantage, I'm sure you'll agree. Much smaller disadvantage than the advantage you get in braking, particularly braking in the wet, braking downhill. The advantages for disc brake road bikes are beginning to stack up, and that's why in FastFitnessTips we're evaluating Giant Defy 1 right now. And for those of you who've made it this far, if you're interested in which disc wheel set to buy, this is a new wheel set finder we've put on Patreon, which is a review of all the disc brake wheel sets on the market right now, where you can put in your preferred weight, your preferred price, your preferred wheel height, your preferred material, your preferred brand, and it will match you against which wheels are there, and it will also even give you a ranking of how good value these are compared to a clever bit of science that's going on behind the scenes in value ranking, which I'll cover in another video. Thanks for staying tuned, guys. As always, have a great ride and stay safe out there. Hey, a quick heads up that we're planning to make Coach's Corner a regular event, so if you have any questions for Coach's Corner, feel free to put them in the description below. Otherwise, it'd be great if you could give us a like or give us a share or join us on Patreon. And remember that during September, you'll get a free pair of time trial gloves or t-shirt if you join at $5 or more. Thanks a lot, guys. Until next time, take care.